A very warm welcome to all of you to this next session in our online workshop. My name is Helen Sayers, and I've been part of the Living Values Education team since the very beginning. When you're talking about values, when you're training people in values, you start to recognize that unless I'm actually living them myself, unless I'm actually a role model, then it's not going to be very easy to expect people around me to understand and to live their own values. I'd like you to join me in watching a brief video, it's just 6.5 minutes long, of a workshop that was conducted recently in India. enjoyed that video, and I'd now like to introduce you to a little boy called Tommy, or it could be a little girl called Teresa. Tommy is looking happy because he feels loved, valued, respected, understood, and safe. A picture of Tommy on a flip chart. And then she took us through a story of Tommy who woke up in the morning hearing his parents shouting at each other, and he felt sad. Then he came downstairs for breakfast, and his mother shoved his meal under his face and didn't even say good morning to him. He felt even worse. And then his father started to tell him to quickly get into the car and rush to go to school. And so Tommy had to leave his breakfast and dash into the car because his father wanted to go early. Off they went to school. Unfortunately, his parents hadn't timed things very well, and poor Tommy was late. So he got a reprimand when he arrived at the gates of school, and he felt even worse. And then he went into his classroom, and he was laughed at by the children because, yet again, Tommy was late. As Samantha ran us through this story, she tore strips off the picture of Tommy. She tore a strip off his arm, a strip off his leg, a strip off his side, just to illustrate how Tommy was feeling as he was reprimanded, as he was bullied, as he was humiliated, as he was blamed for being late, etc. And eventually, the final part of the story, she actually tore his heart in two, and there was hardly a dry eye in the whole room. It was really, really very touching. And it made all of us think how easily we reprimand a child or punish a child or ignore a child or interrupt a child when he wants to talk with us, criticize a child for something that he thought was good and we thought was bad, and so on. The list goes on. And this slowly but surely pulls the child down. And then in order to gain some sort of sense of well-being and some sort of sense of confidence, the child's behaviour often changes at that point, and the child becomes naughty, attention-seeking, might even start to bully the other children, becomes angry, becomes upset, doesn't do his homework, and so on. And so then this child is further punished for all this negative behaviour. But actually, when we look back, we find that the root of that negative behaviour was that the child was humiliated, shamed, punished, etc. There's an expression in English which says there is no smoke without fire. And so the smoke is negative behaviour that we often see in children. But we need to look back and see what was the fire that started the smoke. What were the attitudes and actions of the adults around that child, let alone other children, that could have sparked off that negative behaviour? Tommy's story is very sad and unfortunately all too common. But I'd like to share with you now a story of how the opposite can take place when we create a values-based atmosphere. We facilitated a workshop for street children who'd been brought together by a local Living Values representative who worked for a street children association. At the beginning of the training, these youngsters looked a bit shy, timid, some of them looked bored, but very soon they became engaged in all the activities. They thoroughly enjoyed them. We mixed them in with adults, and they came up with beautiful creative results, paintings. They did some theatre together. Everything they did, in fact, revealed that these children had tremendous talent, but which hadn't been recognised. And at the end of the training. They were all awarded certificates. They left feeling very, very happy. Well, the next day, Mamor and I had to go into town. There are gangs of young people and they can be dangerous. So off we set, Mamor and I, and as we turned the corner, a group of people were coming towards us. Is this one of the gangs? But then, as we watched more closely, we saw these big smiles appear on the faces of these youngsters. And as they came closer still, we recognized that these were the youngsters, the young boys who had been with on the training. They came up to us and they shook our hands and they smiled and they laughed and they chatted with us and they told us what a wonderful time they had. And Mamor asked them, well, what difference has it made in your lives? And they said, we now work together. Before we used to squabble and fight, and now we work in cooperation, and it means that our business works much better. So we said, well, what business do you do? We go and buy bits and pieces from shops and then we sell them to drivers at the crossroads. As the drivers stop, we offer them something. It could be a packet of peanuts, it could be a tin opener, it could be any sort of thing that we've bought. And if they want to buy us, they give us the money and off they go. But quite often, they close their window, give us a bad look, and don't pay any attention. But recently, what we've been doing is we've been creating little cards with a value written on them and an explanation of the value. So we've designed the cards with a beautiful, beautiful drawing, the name of a value, and then a description. And as the cars pull up, we sell them not only a packet of peanuts, but we give them a card for free. And the people are just amazed. They've never received anything like it before. And of course, just reading this value and we tell them, that's you, you are like that, of course, they're very pleased. And so the next day, the same drivers come along and open their windows and call out to us and say, hey, what have you got to sell today? So our business is now booming. Values can't be bought from a shop, of course, and they can't be just understood just from listening to someone talking about them, but they need to be experienced. Reflection is one method. Reflect on a beautiful place, reflect on someone who you admire. And then another method to use to really dive deeply into that realm of values is visualization or using the imagination and rekindling the dream is an activity that's often used in our workshops. I'd like to finish off my session by sharing some examples of how when a person lives their values and lives those values in their everyday life, how it can touch the lives of many other people. Philu had been himself a street child. Philu now has his own gallery in Dakar. And it was just lovely to hear how his life had been changed. Another example is a young man called Babacar, who in fact I met right in the early days of our work in Senegal, and he must have been about 13 or 14. And I noticed how Rene always gave him responsibilities, made him the leader of the little group of kids that were developing around him. Babacar now is a businessman. He buys and sells cars. He's now got his own family. He told me, thanks to Rene, that he's a successful businessman because Rene taught him responsibility and honesty. He said he's got a lot of other friends who have tried to set up a business, but they're not successful like he is because they don't practice honesty. When we encourage others, when we work with others, when we create this values-based atmosphere around us, as teachers, as parents, as people in society, as friends of others, we just never know whose lives we're going to touch, even on very small levels.